Okay. Well, life continues on lifing, doesn't it? Now, where were we? Oh yes, Rule 7. Work as hard as you possibly can on at least one thing and see what happens. And that sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? But we know better than that with Dr. Peterson, don't we, dear viewer? This video made possible thanks to the continuing support of viewers, patrons, and PayPal pals like you. Thanks! Hello and welcome back for this unappetizing lobster course. It's certainly one that builds character, albeit not in the way the chef originally intended. So, this is a new rule. Let's get what info we can going in. Ooh, new paragraph in the overture. Does this mean we're moving on from all the anti-ideology from the last rule? We can hope. Quote, Rule 7 outlines the crucial relationship between disciplined striving in a single direction and forging of the individual character capable of resilience in the face of adversity. Okay, so it sounds like we can prepare for a 12 rules for life mishmash of Rule 4, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today, and Rule 7, pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. Next, we have the chapter art. You may recall our varying levels of success in understanding the Petersonian symbolic meaning of these. This immediately read to me as Eris, the tragic Greek character who flew too close to the sun in his exuberant hubris, resulting in his wings melting off and him falling to his death.
And so that's Lucifer plummeting from heaven.
Yeah, that's the one.
Oh, or that. Here we've got an older man looking over at the boy's work and polishing a shoe. Given Peterson's love of Pinocchio, and as it turns out some cryptomnesia, I thought perhaps the older man was supposed to be Geppetto, but the pieces don't really make sense there. Geppetto was a wood carver, hence making his own boy puppet. So if he was a tailor instead, he would have made what, a body pillow? That's got some disturbing implications. Unless the boy is supposed to be Pinocchio, post non-live action Disney ending, he seems to not be particularly puppety. So it's probably safe to assume this is just a master cobbler and his apprentice and a very barky dog next door. For some fun, I asked Dr. Mr. the husband what he got out of this, as he isn't so deep in the lobster lore. Eventually he came to the same gist. Along the way we got observations about the inferred class stats of the shop, given how run down and tattered things seem to be, including, quote, whatever's going on with the roof, and the window in the back looking shabby. But that was contrasted by the nice, albeit nonsensically designed stained glass windows next to the two. And before we start talking about AI, remember that this artist does collage style, and this was made before all of the generative AI things were a thing. Also, he opined that the man is too old to be the boy's dad, but could be his grandfather. I'm of the mind that they don't have to be related, as apprenticeships don't have to be sourced from within the family. For example, my maternal grandfather was apprenticed as a machinist. His father was a woodworker. Let's see what the intended meaning was, and if we miss the mark yet again. Time to consult Peterson's interview with the artist Juliet Fogra. Peterson loves what the artist did.
It's got the feeling of a child's fairy tale, but one that's not speaking down to children.
Uh-huh. Okay. He talks about the love conveyed in this image, and that reflects the love that, quote, frequently happens in mentorship relationships, because the mentor is teaching the mentee something they'll be able to make a living from.
He's the good father, like Geppetto. He's obviously pleased that his apprentice is showing mastery.
So he didn't say this was Geppetto, he drew the analogy. I guess that piece of info was floating around the back of my mind while revisiting this image. If I were giving constructive feedback on this piece, like it was a draft still, I'd say that point about the mentor being pleased about demonstrated mastery would be better illustrated if he was looking at the boot instead of the back of the kid's head. Maybe the artist couldn't find Jung's face in a way that worked. Spoilers? We'll get there. Peterson suggests that a good parent could be defined by being happy when their child gains competence, and hopefully overtakes them in mastery of things. He loves all the love in the image.
Yeah, I've tried to appeal to you. If you look at the old guy, he's a Jung character.
Ah!
I can't believe you haven't noticed.
The list of things that I haven't noticed would fill many, many books.
She eventually says that the boy's face came from an old picture of her son. I'm kind of surprised she didn't really lean into the Jung angle and try to give the boy a Peterson-esque face. Not that I have extensive experience in that department or anything. Peterson notes this is a room of, quote, productive activity, and
You made it theatrical again with the fabric along the top.
Yep.
And so it's like we're looking into a private moment.
well, that's not as bad as misunderstanding Satan as Icarus, but still not great. I didn't even really register those folded whatevers along the top as anything other than noise, so just ignored them. As mentioned, my husband took notice but had no idea what to make of them, so took them as just shabby ceiling. Apparently, they're supposed to be like theater curtains or something. That certainly could have been more clear, especially with her Photoshop collage style. The importance of this theatricality is
You're displaying to the viewer something of crucial importance here, is that this relationship exists and it's healthy and positive.
Yeah,
and something
it's
to be.
possible and it's intimate, very intimate.
Yes, and it's intimate as well. Yes, exactly.
Can't say I really relate, but my main mentee experience was admittedly a flaming train wreck. It does seem a bit weird that they're basically saying that they're bringing awareness to mentorship relationships existing, right? Okay, so the big takeaways are that mentorships exist and are healthy and positive and intimate. That doesn't easily mesh with the rule summary from the overture, but it doesn't clash, at least. Time will tell if either of these is representative of the chapter advice itself. Last thing to consider at the outset are the references for this chapter. All 2 of them. Well, 2 is misrepresenting things a smidge. The first endnote contains 3 references, and the second note just 1, bringing the grand total for this chapter to 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yay!
Looks like we'll be talking about the bio part of biopsychosocial for depression, then aggression in kids, which will link back to the rule title about working hard at something. Somehow. And final stuff before we can get the show on the road. I braved my analytics to make this informed request. So, I would never ask anybody to ring the bell because I don't have it rung for anybody, so, you know. But, 34% of you who aren't currently subscribed, well, here's a little chance for you to go down and give that subscribe button a little hello. Tell it I sent ya. And it's also finally warm enough to wear the cropped hoodie is available on my Fourth Wall store. So, they're the crop version of the super soft hoodies, although some different color selections and matching drawstrings. And they're super soft and cute. What more could you want? Also, still have the shirts, mugs, stickers, magnets, all of the ways to let the world know that your chaotic, pedantic ass wants citations and it wants them now. And final, the quick refresher of the visual shorthand I use to indicate where ideas are coming from. This means I'm talking about Peterson's references or science I'm bringing to the table. This means I'm paraphrasing the book, and this means I'm giving you my opinion on those things. Okie doke, let's work as hard as we can at getting through this chapter and seeing what happens. Peterson starts us off with a geochemistry lesson, talking about how coal is turned into diamond. TLDR, heat and pressure squishes the carbon down into the crystalline form, which has, quote, maximal durability. It can also be squished into graphite, but most people don't consider that as pretty to look at or symbolically meaningful, so we're just gonna gloss over that. But he is correct about the maximum durability part. Diamonds are very hard, like tippy top of the hardness scale for geological stuff. Although apparently they can be burned. Like, in the late 1700s, that's how it was worked out that diamonds are made out of carbon. And I promise this isn't going to turn into diamond facts, even though we're not done with them yet. I'm torn on dinging him for not providing a reference in this process. Like, it's pretty well established and undisputed, but still. Quote, finally, diamonds become capable of reflecting light. Oop! And things were going so well. If diamonds were only reflecting light, they'd be like little disco balls instead of the rare shinies that they are. Some of the light will reflect off the surface of the diamond, sure, but the rest is going to be refracted or bent inside the diamond before passing back out. This is because light acts like a wave, in addition to acting like a particle, so little packets of light information called photons, but that doesn't matter for this. We only care about the wave properties. We can only get so derailed in this video. Refraction happens when light goes from one material to another, so air, water, diamonds, and whatnot. These media have a parameter called its index of refraction, which describes how the electromagnetic waves of light interact and are impeded by the media. So, the speed of light is not a fixed constant, but depends on the media it's traveling through. It also turns out that a medium's index of refraction, so what degree it's going to bend the light, depends on the wavelength of the light, which is why prisms diffract light, but we'll get there. The degree of change between media determines how far the light will bend. Changing to a higher index medium results in the light bending towards normal. Normal in this context basically means perpendicular to the surface, as shown in this Encyclopedia Britannica figure. So, as shown in this figure, the light starts out, let's say in air. Once it hits the surface of the second medium, some of the light is reflected off the surface at the same angle it hit with. The rest of the light enters the second, slower medium. For simplicity, let's say it's water. With the change to a slower medium, the light is bent off the original path. And as shown here, it's bending towards normal, that imaginary line perpendicular to the surface. And in case you made it this far in life without seeing this demo, this is why straws appear to bend in water, because the light is refracting with that change in media. The light is doing the best it can to keep on trucking through that higher refractive index material, it just can't do it as fast, and that slowdown causes it to drift a little bit. Diamonds, being a crystallized form of carbon, means that those atoms are highly efficiently packed in there, which gives it a high relative permittivity, more on that in the description if you want it, which means it has a high index of refraction, which means they refract like a mofo. But that's not all they do. They also have high optical dispersion. Dispersion means that the speed a wave can travel through media depends on its frequency. And we've talked about the frequency of light before, primarily in how it relates to color vision. To be able to talk about dispersion, we need to talk about the frequency and wavelength of light. So the quick and dirty version is what we perceive as white light is actually a small band of the full electromagnetic spectrum. In this chart, as we move along to the right, the wavelength of the light decreases, with wavelength being the distance between peaks. Now, there is a relationship between wavelength and frequency, such that the speed of light is equal to the wavelength of the light multiplied by its frequency. We're going analogy time for this, dear viewer. If that sounded like garbled jargon, don't worry, physics regularly melts my brain too. Imagine you're driving a very hilly road. Not one where you'd catch air going over the hills, but enough that it would make someone like me motion sick. The speed limit for the area seems kind of slow for what it is, but there are some very eager traffic cops just waiting to pounce on anybody who dares to go above that speed limit, even just a smidge, so you are stuck going that speed. So in parts of the road that have these nice long leisurely hills with a nice slow descent and ascent between the valleys and the hills, that is a metaphorically long wavelength. So we're talking about the distance between equivalent points in the curve, usually we talk about peaks for convenience, is long. In parts of the road that has some ridiculous rises and dips in close proximity, looking at you, Northern Michigan, we're talking just up and down, hill, valley, barf, city. This is a metaphorically short wavelength. The distance between the peaks is shorter. Remember how I said that there is a strict speed limit on this road, so you are stuck going that max speed? Well, this means that there is a fixed distance that you can travel per unit of time, let's say a minute. So, the amount of hills that you can cross in a given unit of time is going to be higher in that roller coaster road than the road with the much more relaxed vibe. The number of hills you pass is the frequency. So that's basically the count per unit of time. So hertz is counts per second. And so the roller coaster road has a higher frequency than the road with the chiller vibes. Okay, let's translate this road analogy back to the physics. That speed that you're stuck going at is the speed of light, and that is the limit at which speed can travel. But light is a simplification. What we generally call light contains what we would call red to purple light. Those have different wavelengths. Red light would be like the more relaxed road, and purple light would be like the hold on to your butts road. As such, red light has a lower frequency than purple light. Now, bringing this back to dispersion. Recall that the speed a wave can travel through a medium depends on its frequency. And if you want a why there's a link in the description to try to answer that. The rough answer is it's because of friction. Kinda. It's a permittivity business. So with white light coming into the prism surface, this one is quartz, but diamond will work in a pinch. Some of it is reflected off. Not a bunch, but some. And the rest enters the new medium and is bent. But the white light isn't bent as a whole. The various wavelengths of light making up the white are bent differently, depending on their frequency. The higher frequency wavelengths are bent more towards normal than the lower frequency ones. Hence, dispersion. Bringing this back to Peterson, him describing the properties we talked about as, quote, reflecting light, simplifies things to a point where it loses the meaning for the analogy he's going to be making with diamonds. Yes, some light is reflected, but that's the boring part. The dazzling prism effect has helped make diamonds desirable, to say nothing of their rarity and huge advertising budget. If they didn't have the high index of refraction and optical dispersion, they wouldn't be so interesting to look at. But moving forward, let's keep in mind what makes diamonds special. Largely their perceived rarity, but also in the modern day, they're pretty. And we have been culturally reinforced to like these glittery, sparkly, pretty things.
This combination of durability and glitter gives a diamond the qualities that justify its use as a symbol of value. That which is valuable is pure, properly aligned, and glitters with light. And this is true for the person just as it is for the gem.
So it's safe to say Peterson's only talking about the diamonds who've made it through the grading and cutting process to be gemstones, and not the 70 to 80% that are redirected to other purposes. Come on, Peterson, Dr. Maps of Meaning himself. Point us in the direction of some sort of discussion about the symbolic meaning of diamonds. Bonus points if it isn't your own fucking book. Like, yeah, Wikipedia has plenty to say about this topic, but it would potentially be interesting to see what information he's pulling this from, especially since he vaguely gestures at it rather than giving us specifics. All this is somewhat notable, since the symbols and stories associated with Hinduism seem to be a bit of a blind spot for him, and there's several thousand years of symbolic history there. And it is funny, in this month of Pride, that he's on a crusade about the biblical outcome of pride, but will also write stuff about glittery people being highly valuable. In working through his books, I frequently find myself with the two wolves problem. One wants to give the brief gist so we can move on. The other wants to share with you the purple style mad prose that so frequently peppers his writing. Guess which wolf is winning today?
Ow! Light, of course, signifies the shining brilliance of heightened and focused consciousness. Human beings are conscious during the day, when it is light. Much of that consciousness is visual and therefore dependent on light. To be illuminated or enlightened is to be exceptionally awake and aware, to attain a state of being commonly associated with divinity. To wear a diamond is to become associated with the radiance of the sun, like the king or queen whose profile is stamped on the sun-like disk of the gold coin, a near-universal standard of worth.
You serious?
It's a bit surprising he doesn't just drop in his mom book as a reference and call it a day. But perhaps he doesn't do that because he doesn't talk about it in there. So instead, no reference. Just an implied source? Me, the Jungian psychologist. What even is there to say here, other than to marvel at it all? Although, this sentence would suggest I and many other YouTubers aren't human beings, given our nocturnal inclinations. Didn't think this would be how I found out, but here we are. This all seems specific, but is actually non-specific enough to be hard to evaluate the claims. Kinda ass-pulley too. Going from light signifying consciousness, to awake, to divinity, to the sun, to royalty on coins, to the value of those coins. And sure, I can bring my own knowledge to fill in the gaps, like, depending on who you ask, roughly a third to half of the cortex being used in some visual processing capacity. I shouldn't have to be bridging gaps left to me by the life advice author. Anywho, perhaps you've already figured out the Petersonian logic of how this relates to trying really hard at something.
Heat and pressure transform the base matter of common coal into the crystalline perfection and rare value of the diamond. The same can be said of a person.
Yep. Pressure and heat will transform the schlubby person into the valuable perfect diamond. Although, were this metaphor to properly hold up, there'd be a lot more diamond people around. Diamonds happen under known conditions, whether the coal wants to change or not. Not that it even has an opinion on the matter. The same cannot be said for people. If this were the case, places like higher ed or the armed forces wouldn't have people quit part way. They would be contained in that high-pressure environment and be changed. But that's not how we work. Before we really have time to think about it, he has to pivot us to Jung. But don't worry, he's abandoning the diamond metaphor.
We know that the multiple forces operating in the human soul are often not aligned with each other. We do the things we wish we would not do, and do not do the things we know we should do.
His example is desperately eating Cheetos while wishing to be thin. Okay.
We are directionless, confused, and paralyzed by indecision. We are pulled in all directions by temptations despite our stated will, and we waste time, procrastinate, and feel terrible about it. But we do not change.
I will agree that wanting to change isn't enough. You have to do the things that the change requires. You can't The Secret or otherwise manifest yourself into the life you want. However, using the want of getting thin was certainly a choice, especially as we learn more about the realities of obesity and how it's more complex than just laying off the snack food for most people. When Peterson's bringing up the disharmony of the soul, it seems like he's generally talking about Jung's proposed structure of personality, with the fragmented unconscious archetypes and whatnot that, through the Jungian therapeutic process, can be brought into a unified, integrated self. There is, of course, the possibility he's using this in the more colloquial sense. Remind me, dear viewer, who was it who said we should be precise in our speech? He offhandedly mentions that, quote, since the time of the psychoanalysts, what once were thought to be spirits possessing people have come to be understood psychologically. But the, quote, hierarchical neurological structure, which is basically described as Maslow's hierarchy of needs with neither name or citation, means that the primal needs can, quote, become our masters, or somehow fight with each other, because they're, quote, partial personalities contained within you, don't you know? As a consequence, quote, the resilience and strength of a united spirit is not easy to attain. Jung. Only obliquely mentioned with the psychoanalysts or conceptually dog-whistled with the fighting personalities and goal of a united spirit. Make no mistake, it is at the heart of what he's talking about here. And he's not done with it yet.
A house divided against itself, proverbially, cannot stand. Likewise, a poorly integrated person cannot hold himself together when challenged. He loses union at the highest level of psychological organization. He loses the properly balanced admixture of properties that is another feature of the well-tempered soul, and cannot hold his self together.
He explains that sayings like, he lost it, come from a cultural understanding of this. Also, when someone has fallen apart, they can be, quote, dominated by those, quote, partial personalities. And his clearest example of this is a toddler having a tantrum. That this urchin has been possessed by anger. Seriously.
The archaic motivational systems governing anger merely push the toddler's developing personality aside and have their way with his mind and actions. This is a true and unfortunate defeat for the still fragile centralizing ego, struggling against powerful forces towards psychological and social integration.
All of this seems to imply, to me at least, that there are the people who have their ego integrated and all of those partial personalities unified within themselves, and those who don't. And if you have a moment of emotional weakness, then you aren't a full, real adult, are you? Like, I haven't been shy about how worn out I am by my ongoing health adventure, especially since it just keeps going somehow. And my capacity to deal with this was exceeded a while ago. And that's not because I'm not Jungishly integrated. It's because the American healthcare system is a fucking dystopian nightmare that tortures everyone involved for profit. And sure, that I'm still trucking on and making the calls and lighting fires under people's asses to make progress happen instead of just quietly sobbing to myself in the closet has been surprising to me. I am apparently stronger than I knew. This whole process isn't pressure cooking me into a bright and glittery person. If anything, it's burning out the hope and goodwill I've got left, step by step. It's like they're trying to turn me into coal. The same is true for anyone fighting some sort of systemic problem, especially when they don't have a choice. It's do or die, and it's fucking exhausting. Fundraiser, by the way. We can't all be the strong person at our father's funeral, as instructed by Peterson in 12 Rules. We shouldn't have to be. There should be room for people to be able to receive empathy and help from others, instead of demanding a cruel stoicism be maintained at all times. You'd think a clinical psychologist would understand that. Now, kind of Peterson to immediately demonstrate that's not the case.
Lack of internal union also makes itself known in the increased suffering, magnification of anxiety, absence of motivation, and lack of pleasure that accompany indecision and uncertainty. The inability to decide among 10 things, even when they are desirable, is equivalent to torment by all of them.
Or, in brief, if you've got depression, anxiety, or ADHD, stand up straight with your shoulders back and grow the fuck up. Maybe I'm being unkind. Maybe I'm misinterpreting his intended meaning here, and that he isn't talking about the clinical levels of suffering anxiety, missing motivation, and anhedonia. If that is indeed the case, he definitely should have made that more clear. But hey, good news! Having, quote, clear, well-defined, and non-contradictory goals will clear all this right up.
Clear goals limit and simplify the world as well, reducing uncertainty, anxiety, shame, and the self-devouring psychological forces unleashed by stress.
There he goes again, making concrete promises of what following his life advice will do for you. At least this one's related to the chapter title. It's a little problem that life is generally more complex and will allow for that. I have the very clear-cut goal of getting my symptoms addressed, and I have far more L's than W's at this point. Those goals haven't reduced any of the, quote, uncertainty, anxiety, shame, or, quote, self-devouring psychological forces unleashed by stress when my attempts get thwarted. Promising these sorts of results seem to set the reader up for feeling even worse, especially with the whole Jungian union angle.
The poorly integrated person is thus volatile and directionless, and this is only the beginning. Sufficient volatility and lack of direction can rapidly conspire to produce the helplessness and depression characteristic of prolonged futility. This is not merely a psychological state. The physical consequences of depression, often preceded by an excess secretion of the stress hormone cortisol, are essentially indistinguishable from rapid aging. Weight gain, cardiovascular problems, diabetes, cancer, and Alzheimer's.
Say what now? Maybe the references will help clarify things. This complicates, but also simplifies things. Seeing what sort of impact the first of these references had led me down an interesting rabbit hole I wasn't familiar with. So, in the interest of doing the topic of an inflammatory explanation for psychological disorders justice, we're going to stop this video here and pick it up next time. Even though we were working our hardest to get through this rule, we can see it had too many interesting jumping off points, so until next time, bye.